Hi, I'm Kinsey Schofield. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind the palace gates like never before. We dive deep into the lives of the British royal family with exclusive insight from experts, some of my favorite, and insiders who know them best. Expect unfiltered opinions, controversial takes, and secrets that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the monarchy. This is where tradition meets truth, and nothing is off limits. This week, helping me tackle all of the biggest royal stories of the week, our historian and media strategist, Richard Fitzwilliams. And Emily Andrews, I have missed you so much. My favorite royal reporter. I quote you all the time. I'll be like, and my girlfriend Emily said that was true. So I'm so excited to see you. It's been such a long time.
It's been too long, Kinsey, and it's lovely to see you again. How are you, my dear?
I'm good. I'm so good. I can't wait to actually be in your country again though, because you already have nice, cool weather, I'm hearing, and it's still like sweaty and gross over here in the States.
Oh, I've been gardening today, just like Kate. I've been out in my garden doing a bit of autumnal gardening.
You are so Kate. All right, well, let's jump into some pretty great press we've seen over the last few days. I mean, the visuals were phenomenal. Thousands of people out in the streets of Sydney, eager to see King Charles and Queen Camilla set against the historic Opera House. I mean, for Buckingham Palace, this was likely a highlight and the perfect ending to a royal tour of Australia. Richard, earlier today you mentioned those few count on one hand protesters that monopolized the headlines. There's no way to control that, right? I mean, we're acknowledging that there were just a couple, but it did look, if you are just reading the papers, perhaps bigger than it actually was.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, the answer has to be no. It's a question of what makes the news. I mean, it does take one back to the Prince and Princess of Wales in the Caribbean and that tour, which I thought was, yes, there were optics that could have been improved, but they were somewhat maligned because just a few protesters were news. Well, here, of course, you had one in Parliament, and someone, I mean, Senator Lydia Thorpe had made a habit of various stunts, and this was certainly a spectacular and very, very unnecessary stunt. But I think Republicans were rather embarrassed by it. I don't think most people thought much of it other than that it was extremely unnecessary and, of course, rather cruel, bearing in mind the circumstances in which King Charles came over, having to rest the first day, and the fact also that this was going to be headline news because it happened where it happened and also because she was who she was, and unfortunately because news is what it is. But what was interesting and I thought so significant was that Republicans in Australia, firstly, they were broadly welcoming, but secondly, it was perfectly obvious after the Indigenous vote referendum a year ago that with the need for a majority of voters in a referendum and a majority of the 6 states before Australia became a republic, there'd be absolutely no chance of it anytime soon. So there were a few, very few voices, and in a dignified way, certain Aboriginal elders expressed feelings about sovereignty. But broadly, I think it was a great success. I think it's a terrible shame that they get the publicity. I fear there's
Oh
nothing.
no, Richard, I totally disagree with you. I think it's really important, actually. Look, she's a self-confessed publicist. I have been speaking to my Aussie friends who are quite senior in the press and in politics in Australia. And they're like, look, she's just like a Sheila who just likes to, just shoot a gob off. Obviously she is. But what was really interesting is that Charles and Buckingham Palace courtiers knew she was on the guest list for the Parliament at Canberra and were like, yeah, you know what, it's okay. I think they maybe kind of expected something like that. And I actually think that Charles, not that he could ever say it publicly, but I think he has some sympathy with people, in Aboriginal, Indigenous voices in Australia, definitely. I think, we saw, widening it out slightly to Barbados, we saw he actually went to Barbados when Barbados became a republic. He's made it very, very clear that if people want to have a republic and replace him as head of state, he's down with that. He's cool with that. So actually, I think Richard, he would have been like, no, you know what? I don't think he would have approved of the way in which
Oh,
she
no,
did
no,
it.
no, but
But
nobody
what she
approved of
said
doing
and the
that.
spirit, I think he would.
Only the spirit, but just to take you up on one point there, you're absolutely right, of course. Indeed, this was surfaced as soon as they arrived. The fact that his private secretary had been in touch with the Australian Republican movement, that it was a matter for Australia how the country saw its future. I mean, that's always been the case, and that was just something we expected. But I
Well, it's doing
don't.
a bit of a mad out of a molehill, I thought, that story. Oh, Charles is going to support Republic. I mean, the
Oh,
Queen's position was the same, right? The Queen's position
yeah,
was
but
the
I
same.
mean, but I don't agree that that particular, that language and in that way. I mean, I
You
think
mean the
she
vernacular, Richard? The vernacular.
with the vernacular again. Well, you could say Charles himself, the King's speech, quite literally on the last day when the two pages were stuck together. I mean, that didn't do any harm, and I think people just thought, well, what the
Are
hell?
we allowed to swear, Kinsey? Can we say what what Charles said?
Go ahead. Yeah.
There was a speech which is referring to the last day in Sydney, and the pages touched together. He said that bloody thing.
Yeah,
So
but
Charles
well,
himself is not unused to fruity language.
Right.
it's
Right.
like the two pens that he had earlier in his reign. But I think the specific protest inside Parliament, I mean, if you encourage that sort of thing, it's where will it next be? The sort of just stop oil type protests. And I
Well,
think they
actually,
come.
I thought what was so bad actually about Lydia, to go back for a second, is that she did not support the vote last year for an Indigenous legislature or part of the legislature. She argued against it. So then for her to come storming into Parliament, spouting off Aboriginal rights, I was like, love, last year you were against that effectively because you said it didn't go far enough. But my sense actually, Kinsey and Richard, is that absolutely, I agree with Richard. This tour should be chalked up as a big success for Charles and Camilla. First one, the King and Queen. First one is, to the realms as well. They haven't been to any realms since Charles acceded to the throne in, what an awful verb that is, acceded to the throne. But since Charles has become king, in September 2022. But I do think, speaking to my mates out there who are journos, politicians, big in business, and I've been to Australia many times with the Royals. I love the Aussies, and the Aussies do love the royal family. My mates were kind of like, meh, yeah, it's great to have them. Well done, Charles, for coming over, mate. We know you've got cancer. Big ups for coming. But it's all been a bit like, yeah, whatever. And I do feel that the Aussies are kind of waiting for the big ones. They're waiting for William and Catherine.
Oh, I know. I mean,
May
I
that
would
come soon. Oh, if only, if only.
Well, Emily, I did want to ask you specifically about that, when there was the ruckus and the disruption, Queen Camilla was so cool. I mean, you can just get a sense of how thick her skin is because she was unrattled. She kind of looked over, I believe, at the PM's wife and said something and giggled. But I have never admired her more in that instance because I think I would have been startled. She was just so cool and calm. Did you catch her reaction? Did you have any sort of response to how Queen Camilla handled that?
Well, I've been on tour with Charles and Camilla quite a few times, and the last time I was on tour with them, actually in the Antipodes, was in New Zealand. And I have to say that they love it when things go wrong. That was quite a spectacular going wrong. Someone storming into Parliament. I mean, she's an MP, but storming into Parliament, shouting and swearing and saying, F the colony. But I would have thought that Charles probably would have looked at it and gone, oh dear, oh dear. It's just not very classy. It's not, shouting and swearing, fair enough to have your say, but using the kind of, language that she was, and it wasn't just bloody, as Charles used, a couple of days later, it was the C word, an F word. And I think Camilla probably thought, oh my goodness, what is happening? This is hilarious. Because if you look at the footage, you'll see that as soon as she kind of comes storming in her, did you know she had her high heels on? She kept her high heels on, didn't she? She comes storming in, and the security men all walk quite, quickly in front of Charles and Camilla. There are three of them, and then the others are coming forward. So they're not in any danger because there's protocol and stuff like that. So, and she's probably like, oh, what's happening? Can I get a better look? Because I know from also having met Camilla when I was still working at newspapers, she's really interested in the news. She's really interested in the newspapers, really interested in journalists, and I think she probably would have just wondered who on earth she was and what she was doing.
Yeah.
They
Richard,
didn't show that. I mean, the important thing is I think that they interacted very well with, with the Prime Minister and his partner. I didn't think I couldn't see I was looking to see whether they looked startled, and if they were startled, then they must have been surprised because no one was expecting quite that, even if they expected perhaps something. I think that, they passed it off, because if they had shown a reaction, of course, then that would have been news. King startled by protest, by angry protest, but I think that sort of thing is a pity. There were reports that, in fact, Senator Thorpe had been involved in something near the War Memorial earlier, but hadn't made the news. She certainly made the news, but in my opinion, in the wrong way. And I think the Australian Republican movement I think they will be rather embarrassed by her. She's known for the sort of thing, and she's now very well known for the sort of thing. And unfortunately, and looking at Sky News, I mean, it was the top spot. It was discussed for about 8 minutes or so, and then on other subsequent bulletins. So it is what makes news. But what also made news was the Sydney Opera House being lit up. What also made news was the 10,000 people who waited in the boiling sun to see the King and Queen. What also made news was really favourable optics, I thought, throughout the trip. Obviously, it is so different from the Queen in 1954, and obviously so different from Charles and Diana in 1983, and then that had its problems, which we subsequently discovered. But yes, oh yes, when we have William and Catherine, that would be fantastic, and soon may that day come, but of course it will be so difficult. And the way they managed this with a day for rest and carefully balanced it, and also without evening engagements. So I think it's also fair to say that Australia will be a monarchy foreseeably, despite all the rhetoric.
All right, Emily, I'm going to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 5 kangaroos, how successful was this Australian trip?
I think 4 kangaroos, but partly the lack of interest in republicanism is because Aussies can't really decide who they would want to replace Charles with.
Yeah. All right, Richard Fitzwilliam, 1 to 5 kangaroos. 3?
No, sorry, I said I agree.
Oh, okay. I was like 3. Okay.
No, I agree with Emily. I would give 4, definitely 4 kangaroos out of 5 for it. I think it was pretty good.
I agree.
We're not giving top. We're not doing 5, are we, Richard?
Well, no, I think that 5, we wouldn't have had the protests, and of course, I mean, when it comes to health matters, it's hell for planning the sort of thing with in these circumstances. But for 5, I mean, I think we would have given 5 in 1954.
We wanted koalas. I think for 5 we would have wanted actual petting of koalas and kangaroos.
I agree. We need more of that.
Definitely. An animal as well as the human element.
All right, this is more, I feel like Emily and I are going to be more excited about this story, childhood dreams of royal weddings now being able to become a reality. According to Forbes, the royal family has filed plans with a local government council to open a nearly 300-person wedding venue on the grounds of Balmoral Castle, an estate that has been in the family for nearly 200 years and has been open to the public more than ever under the reign of King Charles. Emily, do you want to get married to me there? Like, I'm ready.
Guys, I know, Kinsey, should we just go and renew our vows? Or it's legal in the UK. I'm not sure how it is state to state in the US, but in the UK it's legal for us to get married to women. Let's just go there. Let's just do it. Once they get their vows, well, not their vows. Oh, I'm so excited, I can't even talk. Once they get their license, we should definitely go do it. I think this is a brilliant idea from the team that run Balmoral Castle, and it is an independent team because can be a bit confusing about who runs which royal palace and who raises money, what raises money for whom. Effectively, it was the late Queen's favourite residence. She said that, as Princess Eugenie said, Granny is the most happy anywhere. only at Balmoral. Probably massively misquoted usually on that. I think she said it better. But Queen Elizabeth's favourite home. She spent a lot of time there. But of course, Charles doesn't need to stay there because he's got Birk Hall, his property just down the road. Why have one Scottish castle when you can have four? Because Charles has four. And so Balmoral really isn't used that much by the family. And Charles and Camilla, when they go up to Scotland, they stay at Birk Hall all the time. Even they move into the castle like for a couple of weeks, maybe when our PM goes up to stay in September. So I think it makes perfect sense that Charles wants to open up the castle a lot more to make it wash its own face, to pay for itself, essentially. And the chance to have a royal wedding there, it's not actually in the castle. It's a sort of barn, posh barn, building adjacent, Balmoral adjacent, castle adjacent, that you can get married in. I think is a really, really sensible idea, because events are the thing that really bring the money in. And Charles has said, and I don't think it's just about the money either. I think it is a genuine wish of his to bring more of the public into these kind of royal spaces, and things like Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, Balmoral Castle, bringing people in and allowing people to see more of the royal mystique. But when the royals aren't there, I think can only be a good thing.
Well, I mean, Richard, Emily makes a great point. Something that has been so critical about the royals is the mystique. Do you ever, I do believe King Charles is incredibly intelligent and probably knows the boundaries, but does he risk ruining any of that mystery by giving people so much access?
I don't think so. I think in 1992, with the terrible winds of fire, then the subsequent decision to open up Buckingham Palace, these were arguments advanced then, that letting people in and the fact that the mystique or some of the mystique might go. The contrary, it's done phenomenal business and it's attracted so many people. And if you look at the lure of the royal palaces, Holyrood House is another one. One of the difficulties, of course, is that there are a large number, and those who are Republicans or in that way inclined do like to point the fact that the royals have this and that and the other and so forth. They forget, of course, conveniently, arguments which show the vast interest that huge global media fascination, the tourism it brings in, all the other benefits, not to mention the way it's televised and so forth. It's absolutely extraordinary, but I do think that all the lettings, the benefit, the money they get from that, more that should be increased, the more sensible it is. It's apparently the Queen's building and it is adjacent to Balmoral itself, so it sounds, just the ticket if you're inclined to have a royal aura to your holiday. With 50,000 acre estate apparently, and of course dating back to Queen Victoria and Albert, who absolutely adored it, and subsequently always associated with royal holidays and happy days. Haven't always been, of course. It's interesting that Diana, when first she was there, was considered ideal and subsequently was not particularly fond of it. But this is obviously it's for happy events. They've said weddings, dinners, meetings and associated events, and Aberdeenshire councils would not dare turn it down.
All right, Emily, is this an example of modernizing the monarchy, or am I miscategorizing this? It feels like it does feel like a modern, intelligent business move.
I think so. I think it is a modern business move. I think it brings the monarchy into the 21st century. But I think the most important thing is that these estates are really, really expensive to run. And it's not just a problem for the royals, actually. It's a problem for all the aristocracy across the UK. They've got these massive piles. They're falling down. It's like several £1 million to fix the roof, for example. And how are you going to do that? Because farming in this country does not bring in the money that it once did. And so a lot of aristos are turning to events, to weddings. So I think it's probably only natural that the royal family would follow suit. My only thought was, as I was listening to Richard and all the history, was what's going to happen when, Charles and Camilla aren't here anymore, and it's William and Catherine, or potentially, and then George, because obviously they've got Birk Hall. That's their private Charles and Camilla's private house. But does that mean then that William and Kate are not going to live at Balmoral? Are they going to live at Birk Hall? Because they don't have a Scottish residence. In fact, actually, I was wrong. I mean, Charles actually has got five palaces up in Scotland. He's got the Palace of Holyrood House, which is the official residence of the Scottish King, which he is. Then there's Balmoral, Birk Hall, Dumfries House, and the Castle of May, which was the Queen Mother's. And so, like, actually, William doesn't stay at any of these places. So I was just kind of thinking, what then happens to Balmoral if you roll out Balmoral, if you give it a wedding license, you let people stay there all year round, blah, 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 you turn it into a royal hotel effectively, then, yeah, what happens with the next reign? Don't know.
That's a very good question. Emily, you're going to hate me for adding this to our agenda. I can already feel it. But this morning, I got so many text messages, some from my Hollywood friends that are getting ready to produce their entertainment shows today. I have not seen this paper myself, but the Express reports that the Montecito Journal, which counts King Charles among its readers, we know he's a newsie, just like Queen Camilla, but they have highlighted the recent solo engagements by Harry and Meghan. And
I'm going to give you an eye roll.
I know,
I'm going to give you an eye roll, girl.
They go as far as to speculate on their marriage. The Montecito Journal is, it's the go-to publication for the A-list.
Yeah, but if you look, the crucial thing, yes, you're talking about Grapevine, which is a gossip column, and it's written by Richard Minards, who is an ex-tabloid reporter. He used to work for the Mirror and the Mail back here in the UK. He has worded it extremely carefully because I did go and look this morning. He has said that royal experts in the UK are talking about a potential separation of time. That's how he words it. And then, of course, it's just another reason to spin up this clickbait rubbish, I may say, about Harry and Meghan splitting up. I mean, the real reason, like, if he'd written, my sources tell me, etc., 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 then I'd be like, yeah, absolutely. He's a very good reporter. I've spoken to him. He's on the money. He's on the ground. Much more importantly, but he hasn't said that. He's couched it in very careful terms. I think that none of us, if we're being honest, Kins, none of us know what's going on in Meghan and Harry's marriage. Like, what I can tell you is having two young children is blooming difficult and it's hard work. And I imagine being married to Meghan is probably quite hard work too. So none of us know what's going on. But all you can do is talk to sources who say that things are fine, I've been told, and look at Harry, when he's with her, very happy. And I think that this is a professional separation, not a personal separation. We're seeing them kind of with their business interests.
That is what I said to one of my friends. Like, surely a publicist has said, people are invested in Harry. We've known him longer. Let's thrust him out, remind everybody why they love him. And then that love will transfer onto his wife. I think that is a pretty common strategy. I guess, Richard, my question for you would be about this. Does this annoy Harry and Meghan that it's become community gossip? It's one thing for the UK to say something and Harry and Meghan roll their eyes and go, we told you, these tabloids, they're harassing us. But when it becomes community gossip, that's another level of annoyance.
I think annoyance, but again, I mean, as Emily was saying, the way it's been phrased and the fact these rumours, every time they appear solo, this sort of thing starts. And since it's able to get traction online and elsewhere, well, I mean, obviously they're trying something new, and obviously, again, these solo engagements, I think it was a rather successful way they were handling it, because firstly, after all, they had the fleeting visit to Jamaica, then they had the faux royal trip to Nigeria, and also the faux royal trip and subsequently handling those. I mean, they weren't paying for it because the respective governments were footing the bill, and they were able to trail certain charities and so forth, and it seemed to go reasonably well. And then it was decided that Harry would, or they decided, I mean, as I say, I couldn't possibly comment on any ups and downs in the relationship, but what one could say is that the fact that we saw Harry when we did in New York, and then subsequently in London, and then subsequently again in Lesotho, we know how South Africa, we know how close to his heart Lesotho is, and of course going back to Sentebale, what it reminded us, and I think this is what was intended. You think back, and there was the Harry that started Sentebale, Forget-Me-Not, which was the Princess of Wales's favourite flower, and also with Princess for both their mothers. Then there was Prince Harry, who began the Invictus Games, which was such a superlative achievement, which indeed it is. And there he was interacting so beautifully, and he was with the children and the well child. I mean, all of that brought back memories, and also it helped Harry's image. And, well, I mean, we've seen them together, we've seen them apart. She's appeared solo. So they're trying different things, I think, recently. At least, I mean, for example, what would have today been an absolute catastrophe with Spare released in paperback, had Harry included any of the 400 pages that he said he cut out of it in that interview with the Telegraph last January, when it was released, and had he given any interviews, I don't think that there was the remotest possibility of that, given the fact that King Charles and Catherine are seriously ill. But if anything of the sort, anything new had appeared, I really do think that that would have caused real problems. As it is, what's said locally, it will probably, what's said locally in local newspapers, well, maybe it's gone more global than it should, but then when you're dealing with the Sussexes, this is basically what happens. But I think they've handled things better recently. On the other hand, of course, Tina Brown has her own views as to how...
Yeah, and I thought, actually, yeah, I was going to say, Rich, I thought what Tina Brown had to say, I totally agree with. I mean, I was actually quite surprised that Tina went as far as she did. You know, respected journalist, veteran journalist of the, British press, and then obviously took America by storm in the 80s and the 90s. She's written 3 books on the royals. Friend of Princess Diana. She had lunch with her. She used to speak to her. I don't think she was a friend, but she really kind of on an American podcast was publicizing her Substack, and the journalist asked her about a whole number of questions. But of course, the things on Harry and Meghan got the attention, got the headlines, and she basically said, and I agree with Tina. She said, like, Meghan's run out of road. She said, where is she going to go now? I mean, but when she said that Meghan was flawless at getting it wrong, an absolute perfectionist at getting it wrong, I was like, "Ooh, okay." She basically was saying that Meghan is completely wrong in her strategic direction. She's tried everything. She thought she could sell Hollywood to Harry. She thought she could crack Hollywood. That's why they went to America. It's failed. Everything she's done has failed. She loses staff because she doesn't listen to people. They give her their opinion and she ignores it. She almost, Tina, I was listening to it yesterday. She talks about WME, Meghan's big management company. And I inferred from what Tina didn't say was that, even WME, Meghan doesn't listen to what they say,
well,
and therefore,
I have a sneaky suspicion. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but
no. What do you think?
I have a sneaky suspicion that to what you were saying, suggesting WME is having issues, because WME could have killed that Hollywood Reporter story, and they did not. Why wouldn't they want to protect their client? That was such a, I was surprised at how negatively that it affected the Sussexes and how much it spread. William Morris Endeavor could have made one phone call, threatened their entire client list. You will not have access to any of our talent. The Hollywood Reporter would have lost a huge opportunity to work with A-listers, and that phone call didn't happen. And I think,
and you know what? The Hollywood Reporter could have done it as a blind item because it was in their gossip column. But the other thing is, Damage Control, they went to Us Weekly, the most down market US tabloid. And then even if anyone hadn't, not that many people were reading the gossip column in Hollywood Reporter, but anyone in a supermarket in America gets Us Weekly, right? What was Meghan doing?
Yeah.
And also Hollywood Reporter coming back and confirming it, and also saying that the source was working for them. So he or she knew a great deal about bullying.
that's what made it even weirder to me, because you've gone to Us Weekly, you've basically got your PR chief Ashley, you've got Mandana Dayani, you've got, even they managed to unearth Josh Kettler, who'd been hiding under a big rock trying to pretend that none of this was happening, their chief of staff who had just resigned, which had kind of started all of this. And I was like, obviously Ashley Hansen, who's again just left them, had organised all of this as a sort of comeback. But like, I just thought, Meghan in the past, her organs of choice in America have been like the New York Times, the Washington Post, The Cut, which I think is the magazine, isn't it, of the New York.
Oh, The Cut, incidentally, Emily, I must just remind everyone of the disaster. The quote in The Cut when Meghan gave that interview that she made up. It must have been, because no person could be found that's supposed to have said it in 2019 at the premiere of The Lion King, that someone from South Africa said that the rejoicing in the streets when she and Harry married was similar to that when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. I mean, words fail me. No wonder Tina Brown said what she did.
Yeah. Well, I just thought, it was a very odd choice for Meghan and her publicity team to go for Us Weekly. And I wonder whether Tina Brown, because she's very good at putting things in the round, and she's got impeccable sources in both the UK and the US. I have not heard her speak so negatively about Meghan before, and I really feel like Meghan is going to struggle. I think that I'm sure American Review Orchard is going to sell, but like, why has it taken almost a year for it to come onto the market? Presumably it's going to be launched at the same time as the Netflix show, the cookery show, in January. But like, Harry's gone back to what he's good at, right? Everything that Richard said earlier is like a page of his diary from sort of 2017, 2016.
Why do the polo? Why do you think
Prince Harry?
Why do you think he chose polo, though, for the docuseries, which he apparently hardly appears in? It's elitist. People won't watch, I don't think.
Well, that was stupid. But I mean, Richard, as we know, they don't have very good ideas. They think they've come into Hollywood thinking they can be like TV producers, and, just because of who they are, and they don't have very good ideas. I mean, there was that guy from Spotify, wasn't it? One of the chief executives, who called them grifters because their ideas were so rubbish and they were just getting money for, in England, Kinsey, we would say money for old rope. In America, you say grifter. In the UK, we say money for old rope, money for absolute rubbish. I
think a show where you interview the Pope, Donald Trump, and Putin is a great idea. I just don't think that Prince Harry has those kind of contacts. I'd love to watch that show. I just don't think that's realistic.
No, it would have been. You're right. It would have been gold mine. I suppose it's just that naivety, isn't it?
Yes, I don't think. Also, I mean, what is the month? Is it next October that the Netflix contract runs out? Because that is obviously something that will worry them, because if one considers that the Crown, when they signed with Netflix, Netflix had the Crown and were making a big thing of it. It doesn't exist anymore. And also, the episode that Mr. Al-Fayed appeared in is not one I suspect that Morgan will be very proud of looking back. So
wow, that's a good point. I totally forgot about that. I know we're up against the clock here. Emily and Richard, whether either one of you jump in if you know the answer to this. This story about the Princess of Wales being upset that George is off to boarding school. It was my understanding that they weren't really seriously considering boarding school for Prince George. Am I off in that, or do we have any clue? I would be very surprised if they sent Prince George off to boarding school. Do you have an opinion, Emily?
Well, actually, I wrote a story a couple of years back that, or at least I tried to, before Kensington Palace came and metaphorically jumped on me, that William and Kate were the first royals not to send their children to boarding prep school. They were kind of, going against royal tradition, educating them at home, yada yada. This was before their move to Windsor. My understanding from my sources at the time was that Kate and William didn't want to send George and then Charlotte and Louis to boarding school age 9, which you can do, prep school in the UK. And that in the UK, you can send boys to boarding school, the very posh ones, they go at 13 and the girls go at 11. Although I suspect at Marlborough, which is mixed, you could probably go at 11. My feeling feeling is that my feeling at the time now, as I understand it, and then Kate always thought that she would send her kids to boarding school at 13, and or that if George does go to Eton, maybe he'll flexi-board. I personally thought this story was an absolute load of rubbish. I thought it was made up rubbish. How can anyone possibly know what Kate thinks? And Kate will do what's best for her children. And my understanding from speaking to those close to her is that what she views as best for her children is changes on a year-to-year basis, as it does with anyone's children. I think for George, were he to go to Eton, obviously William went to Eton, the Queen got taught by the provost at Eton, Charles obviously went to Gordonston. If he went to Eton, he could go and flexi-board. He could board for a couple of nights and then come home to Adelaide Cottage because it's so close. If he went to Marlborough, then again, boarding schools have evolved from that awful time that Charles had when he was at Gordonston, with all the sport and windows open at night and bagging and bullying and stuff like that. So I suspect that Kate's very happy to send her kids to boarding school, but only when she feels it's right for them.
Richard,
no, I mean, there's no doubt that I think that summarizes what the situation is, as opposed to what makes headlines, which, as we've been discussing, it can be almost anything. I mean, I should think that for years I would have always bet on the Eton possibility, but there is the Marlborough one. I mean, they don't have to make a decision at the moment, but anything can be written. And the idea that Catherine in some ways concerned or split from William on this issue and so forth, it dramatizes it's complete emptiness. I think it's nonsense, but I do think it's a very, very important decision when it happens, and it won't probably for a while. So Eton would I have to say be my bet, but of course the idea you bring up down House and how unhappy Catherine was then, and oh dear, it's a single-sex school and that's what's horrifying. For the rubbish bin, this is where the 2 pages of Charles's speech in Australia was stuck together. Well, this whole article should have been stuck together and then set fire to.
Richard Fitzwilliam.
I totally agree.
Emily Andrews, thank you so much for spending time with me today. Excellent analysis. Whether you agree with us or disagree with us, let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I hope you two will come back and talk to me again soon. I had so much fun today.